Your sister needs this more than you do, my mother said after stealing my job offer. I exposed her fraud. Weeks later, her business crumbled. I, 34F, spent years climbing the corporate ladder as a single mother, only to discover my own mother had stabbed me in the back in the most unimaginable way. Some might say that blood is thicker than water, but what happens when that blood poisons everything you've worked for? Let me start by introducing myself. I'm Claire, a finance professional with an MBA that I earned taking night classes while working full-time and raising my daughter Lily, who's now 8. Getting where I am wasn't easy. No one handed me anything. I worked through exhaustion, self-doubt, and countless setbacks to build a stable life for my daughter and myself. My mother, Sharon, 58, has always been a domineering presence in my life. She ran a moderately successful business consulting firm after spending years as a mid-level executive at various companies. Growing up, I watched as she consistently favored my younger sister Betty, 28, over me. It was never subtle. When our father was alive, he served as a buffer between us, softening my mother's harsh criticisms and making sure I wasn't completely overlooked. But after he passed away when I was 25, that buffer disappeared. The pattern was always the same. My achievements were minimized while Betty's were celebrated. When I graduated with honors from my undergraduate program while working 2 jobs, my mother simply nodded and said, "That's nice, dear." When Betty barely passed her classes a few years later, my mother threw her an extravagant party and bought her a car. When I became pregnant with Lily and decided to raise her on my own after her father made it clear he wasn't interested in parenthood, my mother never let me forget what a shame it was. "You were always so bright, Claire," she would say with a sigh. "If only you had made better choices." Meanwhile, she paid for Betty's entire business degree, something I had to finance myself through loans and endless night shifts. Despite everything, I maintained a strained but civil relationship with my mother and sister for Lily's sake. I wanted my daughter to have a family beyond just me, even if that family was deeply flawed. We had our Sunday dinners at my mother's house where I'd grit my teeth through her backhanded compliments and Betty's smug attitude. I kept firm boundaries, but a small part of me still hoped for my mother's approval. Then came the opportunity that could change everything for Lily and me. Bradford Capital, one of the most prestigious financial firms in the city, was looking for a new director of investment strategy. It was exactly the kind of position I'd been working toward for years. The salary was nearly double what I was making, and the benefits package included a college savings plan that would secure Lily's future education. I prepared for weeks. I researched Bradford's investment history, analyzed their portfolio performance, and practiced interview questions until Lily could recite my answers along with me. The interview process was rigorous, 4 rounds over 3 weeks, including a presentation to the executive team on how I would restructure their approach to emerging markets. After my final interview, Bradford's CFO shook my hand and told me I'd impressed them all. "We'll be in touch very soon," he said with a knowing smile. I felt it in my bones. This was going to happen. That weekend at our family dinner, I broke my own rule about not discussing my career with my mother and shared my excitement about the opportunity. "Bradford Capital, isn't that where Richard Townsend is CEO?" my mother asked, suddenly interested. "I consulted for one of their subsidiaries years ago." Betty looked up from her phone, a flash of something jealousy crossing her face. "Yes, Richard Townsend is the CEO," I confirmed, instantly regretting sharing this information. My mother's sudden interest made me uneasy, but I pushed the feeling aside. This was my moment, and for once I wanted her to acknowledge my achievement. 3 days later, I received a puzzling call from Bradford's HR department. "Ms. Bennett, we're following up regarding your decision to decline our offer," the HR director said. My heart dropped. "I'm sorry, what?" "I never declined any offer." There was an uncomfortable pause on the line. "We were surprised when your mother called to decline the position on your behalf and suggested we consider your sister instead. She was quite persuasive about why her other daughter would be a better fit." The room spun around me. I somehow managed to maintain my composure long enough to clarify that I had never authorized anyone to speak for me and that I was very much interested in the position. The HR director sounded confused and promised to look into the situation. I hung up and sat in stunned silence for several minutes before the rage took over. I drove straight to my mother's house, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. When I pulled into her driveway, I saw Betty's car already there, of course. The confrontation that followed was explosive. My mother didn't even try to deny what she'd done. "Betty needs this more than you do," she said dismissively, as if she'd simply taken the last dinner roll from my plate instead of potentially destroying my career. "You're already established. Besides, you're just better suited to being a housekeeper than an executive." Those words cut through me like a knife. After everything I'd sacrificed, after all the late nights and early mornings, the student loans, the childcare struggles, this was how my mother saw me. Not as a professional with an MBA and a decade of experience, but as someone who should be cleaning up after others. Betty stood behind my mother, arms crossed, with a self-satisfied smile that made my blood boil. "How could you do this?" I asked, my voice breaking. "I've worked my entire adult life for an opportunity like this." "Don't be so dramatic, Claire," Betty chimed in. "It's just a job, and honestly, I'm more qualified for it anyway." I left their house that day with the clear understanding that my family as I knew it was over. The sense of betrayal was overwhelming, so profound that I spent the next 3 days in a fog of shock and grief. I had to explain to Lily in the simplest terms why we wouldn't be going to Grandma's for dinner anymore, which broke my heart all over again. My closest friend, Andrea, came over with wine and takeout after Lily went to bed on the third night. As I poured out the whole sordid story, she listened without interruption. When I finally fell silent, she looked me straight in the eyes. "Claire, this isn't just wrong, it's potentially fraudulent. How exactly did your mother represent herself to Bradford? Did she pretend to be you?" Her questions triggered something in my mind. I hadn't even considered the legal implications. The next morning, after dropping Lily at school, I began investigating. It didn't take long to discover that my mother had orchestrated something far more calculated than a simple phone call. Through careful digging, I learned that Sharon had leveraged her old business connection with Patricia Winters, Bradford's HR director, someone she'd consulted for years ago. Using that relationship, she had convinced Patricia that she was acting as my career manager and that I had authorized her to handle all communications regarding the position. Sharon had obtained a copy of my resume credentials from my old laptop during a Sunday dinner when I had stepped out to help Lily with something. She then drafted a formal letter declining the offer on Bradford letterhead she'd saved from her consulting days, forged my signature, and delivered it personally to Patricia. In the same meeting, she'd presented Betty's resume, significantly enhanced with my accomplishments and experience, and suggested that Bradford consider her as an alternative candidate to avoid wasting time restarting their search. I documented everything methodically, compiling emails, timestamps, and evidence of the deception. A quick search revealed that impersonating someone for financial gain could potentially constitute fraud. While I wasn't certain if criminal charges would stick, I knew with absolute certainty that Bradford Capital would be interested in this information. After careful consideration, I drafted an email to Richard Townsend, Bradford's CEO, detailing exactly what had happened and attaching evidence of my mother's deception. I kept the tone professional despite my rage, focusing on the facts and expressing my continued interest in working with Bradford in whatever capacity they might still consider appropriate. The response was swift. Within hours, I received a call from Bradford's legal counsel requesting a meeting the following day. During that meeting, I provided additional documentation and answered their questions candidly. They were particularly interested in the fact that Betty had been hired based largely on credentials and work that were mine. The counsel informed me that they would investigate thoroughly and take appropriate action. What happened next unfolded more dramatically than even I could have anticipated. Betty, who had started at Bradford the previous week, was already struggling. According to information that later made its way back to me, she had been unable to answer basic questions about investment strategies that anyone with my claimed experience should know. Management had been concerned but chalked it up to new job nerves until she was asked to lead a meeting with a key client. Witnesses described it as a slow-motion train wreck. When asked specific questions about market analysis techniques she had supposedly pioneered my techniques, detailed in my presentation, Betty began by confidently spouting financial jargon that didn't actually answer the questions. As the clients pressed for more concrete explanations, her veneer of expertise cracked. Rather than admit defeat, Betty attempted a bold gambit. She pulled up slides from my presentation and tried to redirect the conversation. "Let's focus on implementation rather than methodology," she suggested smoothly. "The important thing is that these strategies work, not how they were developed." The chief investment officer wasn't having it. "No, Ms. Bennett, the methodology is precisely what we're paying Bradford for. If you developed these models as your resume claims, explaining them should be straightforward." Cornered, Betty then claimed she was taking a different approach than originally outlined in her application materials. She even went so far as to suggest that the clients were being unnecessarily combative and that perhaps they weren't sophisticated enough to appreciate her innovative thinking. This catastrophic misstep led to the client demanding to speak with senior management immediately. Bradford's executive vice president, who had been observing quietly, stepped in and adjourned the meeting. Betty was escorted to a conference room where, over 3 increasingly tense hours, her story unraveled completely. She first tried blaming it for mixing up presentation materials, then suggested she'd been set up by jealous colleagues. When confronted with the mounting evidence, she finally broke down and admitted her involvement in the scheme, though she still tried to characterize herself as a victim of our mother's manipulations. The fallout was swift and far-reaching. Bradford terminated Betty's employment that same day and issued a formal apology to me. By the end of the week, word had spread throughout the industry about how Sharon Bennett had attempted to fraudulently manipulate the hearing process at one of the city's most respected financial institutions. My mother's consulting business began to suffer as clients distanced themselves from her. Her reputation, built over decades, was crumbling. Betty found herself blacklisted from financial firms throughout the city. No one wanted to hire someone with such a profound ethical lapse on their record, especially in an industry where trust and integrity are paramount. Meanwhile, my phone was blowing up with desperate calls and messages from both of them. My mother veered between rage and pleading, while Betty alternated between blaming our mother and begging for my help. I blocked their numbers and focused on rebuilding my own professional reputation. 2 weeks after the implosion at Bradford, I received a personal call from Richard Townsend himself. He expressed his regret over the situation and made me an unexpected offer, a position as Senior Director of Investment Strategy, a step above the role I'd originally interviewed for, with a compensation package that exceeded my wildest expectations. "We need people of integrity on our team," he said, "and from everything I've seen, you have that in spades." I accepted on the spot. The following Monday, I walked into Bradford Capital as a senior director, my head held high. My orientation package included options for the college savings plan that would secure Lily's future. After my first week, I signed the papers for a mortgage pre-approval on a house in a neighborhood with excellent schools, something I'd only dreamed of before. My performance over the first 90 days exceeded even my own expectations. I implemented several of the strategies I'd outlined in my interview presentation, resulting in a 12% increase in returns for one of Bradford's largest investment funds. At the quarterly company meeting, Richard publicly recognized my contributions, noting that I had brought exactly the kind of innovative thinking Bradford needs to maintain its competitive edge. As for my mother and sister, I maintained complete radio silence. I had finally accepted that no amount of success would ever make my mother see my worth, and no amount of familial obligation justified maintaining toxic relationships. I started seeing a therapist to process the family trauma and found myself sleeping better than I had in years. Lily and I created new traditions and surrounded ourselves with what Andrea called our chosen family, friends who genuinely supported us and celebrated our successes without resentment or manipulation. Sunday brunches at Andrea's replaced the tense dinners at my mother's house, filled with laughter instead of walking on eggshells. 6 months after I started at Bradford, I heard through industry contacts that my mother's business was struggling significantly. She had lost several major clients and was having trouble attracting new ones. Betty had moved back into our mother's house, unable to find work in finance and bouncing between retail jobs. I felt no satisfaction in their difficulties, only a profound sense of relief that I was no longer entangled in their toxic dynamic. Meanwhile, my career continued to flourish. I received a promotion to executive level after helping Bradford secure a major international client. Lily thrived in her new school, making friends and excelling academically in ways that made my heart swell with pride. The communications from my mother evolved over time, telling their own story of her emotional journey. The first letter arrived 3 months after the incident, addressed to my home rather than my office, as if she knew a work letter might go directly into the trash. This initial letter was breathtaking in its audacity. She expressed disappointment in my overreaction and suggested that she had only been trying to help both her daughters. She claimed her intentions were good, even if her methods were perhaps a bit unorthodox. She wrote that families should stick together through misunderstandings and that I was hurting Lily by depriving her of her grandmother and aunt. I read it once, then shredded it without response. 2 months later came another letter. The tone dramatically shifted to anger. She accused me of deliberately destroying her business and Betty's career out of childish jealousy and spite. She claimed I had always been difficult and unable to share the spotlight. This one I didn't even finish reading. 3 more letters followed over the next few months, each showing a gradual shift in perspective. The anger gave way to bargaining. Perhaps we could meet just once to clear the air, then to a depressed acceptance of the consequences. I understand now that some damage can't be undone. And finally, nearly a year after the incident, a letter that seemed to contain genuine remorse. This final letter was different from all the others. Gone was the manipulative language and subtle blame shifting. Instead, my mother acknowledged her grave error in judgment and the inexcusable betrayal of my trust. She detailed specifically what she had done wrong without justification or excuse. She wrote about how losing her consulting business and watching Betty struggle had forced her to confront the consequences of her actions, and her lifelong pattern of favoring one daughter over the other. Most surprisingly, she didn't ask for forgiveness or reconciliation, only that I know she recognized the harm she had caused. I sat with that letter for days, unsure how to respond or whether to respond at all. My therapist encouraged me to sit with my feelings without rushing to a decision. Part of me wanted to ignore it completely. Another part wondered if people could truly change when forced to face the repercussions of their actions. In the end, I sent a brief, neutral acknowledgement of her letter. I made it clear that while I appreciated her recognition of the harm she'd caused, I wasn't ready for reconciliation and might never be. I wished her well but emphasized that my boundaries were non-negotiable. Sometimes, I wonder what my father would think of everything that happened. I like to believe he would be proud of me not just for my professional success, but for finally standing up for myself and breaking the cycle of favoritism and emotional manipulation that had defined our family for so long. As for Lily, she occasionally asks about her grandmother and aunt. I've never spoken ill of them to her, only explained in age-appropriate ways that sometimes adults make bad choices that hurt other people, and that it's okay to love someone from a distance when being close to them isn't healthy. I hope that by modeling these boundaries, I'm teaching her a lesson it took me far too long to learn, that true family is defined by respect, support, and love, not by blood or obligation. The irony isn't lost on me that in trying to sabotage my career to benefit her favored daughter, my mother ended up destroying her own reputation and Betty's prospects while catapulting me to greater success than I might have otherwise achieved. It's not the kind of justice I would have wished for, but it's a powerful reminder that integrity matters in business and in family. As I sit in my corner office overlooking the city, I no longer feel the ache of maternal rejection that followed me for decades. Instead, I feel something much more powerful, the quiet confidence of a woman who knows her worth isn't determined by anyone else's validation, and that, more than any job title or salary, is the true victory.